and welcome to Group Chat. I am Justin Verrier, and joining me, Big Waz, and we got Boston Bob Mahoney broadcasting live from Beantown. What's up, Rob?
I don't know how I feel about that nickname. I don't
good?
know how I feel. I don't know how I feel about being a Bob.
Mahoney?
The Boston part is okay. The Bob is where I'm really, my body
Okay.
is rejecting it. Just hearing it, I'm having an allergic reaction.
Why are you a Rob and not a Bob, Rob?
And not a Robert.
Is destined in the stars. We don't make these decisions for ourselves. They're thrust upon us. And, basically from birth, I've been a Rob. So here I am before you, now being christened Boston Bob. I guess I'll accept it reluctantly, but I am indisputably in Boston for the NBA Finals. We're thrilled about it.
Yeah, we're broadcasting on the eve of Game 1 of the NBA Finals between the Mavericks and the Celtics. Rob, you're in there in person. You haven't been there long, but give us a taste. What are the sights and sounds on the ground in Boston right now?
The city is bubbling. I feel like I'm a stand-up weatherman. Look, it's beautiful out here. Boston in the summer needs no endorsement from me. The weather's been gorgeous. Had dinner with our coworkers last night, Michael Pina and Howard Beck. Had a delightful Italian food experience, which Boston's North End certainly plenty of opportunity for that. I'm really psyched. As far as opening venues for a Game 1 of the NBA Finals, the Boston crowd is kind of exactly what you want, and ambiance of that building and the history of that building. This is just such a great place to kick off a series like this, and there's so much we can get into in terms of the intrigue, but honestly, the crowd and the bile and the vitriol towards Kyrie Irving and all of the storylines that are wrapping up in this series, this is exactly where we want to be.
Waz, how's your anticipation meter going? I know we're both from afar here, but are you ready for Game 1 tomorrow?
I'm really excited because the few people that I've hit up to be like, what's your sense of the series, right? Because most people think it's going to be very competitive and very close. Most people are just I think Luka's playing incredible, but how can you go against Boston's collective talent? That seems to be the consensus. It's Luka's on a roll. He seems to be on a mission. He's extremely dialed in, but Boston's collective, just skills is just going to win the day. That's what people seem to think.
Yeah. The people I talked to have been just yelling at us. Why are you talking so much about the Mavericks? The Celtics won 60 however many games. They're a juggernaut. But I feel like we gave the credit to the Celtics when we did our pod over the weekend. So that is our full preview podcast. If you want to go back and check that out. Not much has changed since then. It seems like Kristaps is pretty much a sure thing to be playing in this Game 1. We don't know how much, what the minutes look like, but anything else that we're missing going into this first game, Rob?
That was really the only big variable, was if there was any chance KP was going to miss Game 1.
Variable, yeah. Variable.
You don't just get to claim that word in every one of its usages from now on.
But don't I?
That's not how this works.
Okay.
But we do get some clarity on that he's going to give it a go for Game 1. Boston is still being pretty cagey about, and Kristaps is being pretty cagey about how he actually feels and if it's anywhere close to kind of a full go versus, see what you can do and see how you feel out there. I suspect at this point he's going to be more or less pretty mobile, but as we've seen from Kristaps in the past with other injuries, the difference between a fully healthy Kristaps Porzingis and a partially healthy Kristaps Porzingis is monumental. So there's a lot of range there for the Celtics to get less than what they need from him, frankly. He's such an important player and presence in this series.
For sure. Yeah. So go back and listen to our podcast over the weekend. Got 5 variables and whatnot for you to chew in on. But we're going to go, since we already tackled the here and now, we're going to go big picture for today's episode. We're going to step back, look at the trends and the lessons from this postseason. We did this, I think, a couple games into the finals last year, but I'll be honest, this is one of my favorite topics for digging into, just pods and otherwise, and the finals is a pretty good time to do so. I think probably because, as you guys might have been the same, probably read Moneyball at a very formative age. And so the market inefficiencies that drive some of the success in the league and whatnot, I find quite fascinating. And I just want to talk it over with you guys, because I think also what happens is I think we call things trends around this time. and then like half a season goes by and it's like, oh, actually, no, we just kind of overdid it there. So I think it's worth a conversation to kind of hash things out.
Well, especially when the data point for those trends is often one team did this and it worked.
Right.
And so it's so much about how much of it is that team or that player versus is there something here to actually mine? But Woz, this is what they call us in for. You know, everyone else, they're thinking too small. We're blowing it out. We're seeing
Big
the full
picture.
board. We have
That's right.
the whole galaxy in front of us to unravel and unwind.
We're seeing the forest for the trees over here on group chat, and I'm
the
damn
trees
proud
for the
of it.
forest? Which one are we doing?
I'd never
wanna
know
see the
what
forest.
people are saying. Yeah, you want to see the forest.
The trees
I mean,
is
yes.
You're too granular with the trees. Yeah.
Yes.
I agree. But I think maybe forest is even too small.
Oh,
We're zooming out. We're seeing the whole continent. You know, we're seeing the
we got
whole
the whole
landscape.
Google Maps. Yeah.
Love that.
This is the satellite view, baby.
Yeah, I remember the last time the Celtics were in the finals when Boston Bob was back in Boston. Everyone was talking about continuity. That's the way to do it. And I'm just like, isn't that just how people have built teams for 50 odd years at this point? Like I remember editing J.A. Adonde columns when the Spurs were in the finals about like their continuity. I'm just like, this is just what people say when teams stick together for a while. So,
well, there's those waves of stars coming together, super teams come together. Some of them win. And then it's, okay, this is the model. We're rushing together. You use the cap spike. You do all these things. You build your team really quickly and you win. And then in the other years, teams with continuity tend to win. And guys like us sit up here and overestimate and overvalue and overstate, oh, there's only one way to do this. So hopefully we can kind of thread the needle today between these are things that are working now and this is the only way to do things in the modern NBA.
totally. Well, let's start with the opposite of continuity and talk about some of the best additions for the Dallas Mavericks, two of the ones that everyone's been talking about pretty much since the trade deadline, talking specifically about Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively. Lively was already there, obviously, but Gafford came aboard. I'm calling this, for the first one, 48 minutes of vertical hell. And first of all, shouts to our guy, Gordon Gradian, for the old Spurs reference.
You really botched Graydon Gordian's name on that. That was tough. That was tough.
So
Graydon, we apologize. Well, Justin apologizes.
It's been about a decade since I've had to make that callback, so you'll have to excuse me. Not enough continuity leading into that one. So the idea is the Mavs are playing two centers in rotation, quick bursts for a full game, which is different than what we've seen before. Obviously, guys have backups, centers have backups, but the fact that they invested so much in two guys, I think, is unique. Clearly has been a difference in this postseason. Rob, what do you think about this as an overall strategy? Do you think this is new? Do you think this is different? Do you think this is something that might get replicated as a result of the Mavericks' success?
Yeah, it feels a little bit like what's old is new again, in the sense that it's not uncommon for teams to have rim rolling centers, obviously. The market for centers has always been so variable, and that's where things have gotten tricky. You know, we've seen kind of the mid-level centers get paid. The guys who can kind of be stars sometimes, but aren't reliable enough to be on a Jokic and Embiid level. That's in a lot of ways the trickiest area of the bracket.
Maybe
it's
like
if
a
you
Vucci
have
Mane?
a Vucci Mane is a great example. Someone who's good enough to get paid and carry a team to something, but not good enough to take you all the way. And what that does downstream in terms of who else you spend money on, maybe you don't spend as much on a backup center because you think that guy is good enough to hold down the spot. What Dallas has done, and I think what other successful champions have done, including, we should say, the Mavs last time they got to the finals, kind of do this tandem situation, two good centers who can hold down that spot and trade off responsibilities. And if one gets in foul trouble, you can go to the other and vice versa. But you're not having to break the bank in terms of what you're spending on the cap, or in this case, what you're trading, what you're giving up on the trade market. You're able to kind of have your cake and eat it too. And I think these are, in my mind, the two ways to do this. Either you have the high-end superstars, or you kind of have guys in this range who are good centers and are good, reliable players, but aren't compromising you in the way you build the rest of your team.
So I've thought about this a lot watching Dallas, because watching Dallas go from a team that's been piss poor on defense the entire Luka era to what they've been in the playoffs.
Okay. Not last time they went to the conference finals, though. Like that was a good defensive run, too.
Okay, that was a good. That wasn't this though, Rob.
No, this is different.
Couldn't
this is different.
count on them to beat up on quality offenses with regularity, right? So yes,
and protect the rim like this in particular.
2022, they were not piss poor, but nobody would ever say their defense was a strength in the whole Luka era. It's like, all right, this is a good enough defense, but it's not like, oh, we're winning games on this. We're beating teams pretty handily when Luka's shooting 20% from three, because we're snuffing out the other team's offense, right? So
totally,
I've spent a decent amount of time thinking like, damn, like how did we get here? And then you realize the two big man thing, where it solves one of the main big man problems that we have, is that you can't ask a big man to go all out for 40 minutes. You just can't. He's going to get tired. You can't expect him to, screen the hell out of people, roll hard even when he's not getting the ball, get his ass back on defense, do the verticality stuff, switch. Like, you can't ask them to do that for 40 minutes. So it's like, oh, okay, I know what to do. I'll get two of them. Obviously neither one of them are getting crazy starter money, and that's how I'll fill out my entire rotation. And everybody's like, oh, this is a genius plan. Let's do this. Then I introduce a variable to you guys, which I guess is a theme of the show.
Another variable.
Let's say one of these big men is DeAndre Ayton before his contract. How does that go? This platooning big man by committee. It doesn't go. It's just straight up not going to happen. So, like, having these two guys who are willing to play this way, meaning 4 minutes at a time, balls to the wall, tire myself out, I know I'm going to get the blow, and then come back in 4 minutes later and do the same thing. Like, it takes a certain type of player to be at a certain type of place in his career, and then it takes a coach to actually coach it in Jason Kidd. And then, people like me got to sit back and be like, I wonder how long this lasts before folks start saying, you know what? I could be a starting center. You know what? I could get dominating money. You know what? I probably am somebody who deserves that. I wonder about that. So that's why I think about this as a long-term strategy. It's hard for me to conceive of it being that.
I mean, all these championship teams and finals teams in a way, Justin, have to catch that sort of lightning in a bottle. Right place, right time. Like, PJ Washington is available right when you need him. Daniel Gafford is available right when you need him. Derek Lively is this good as a rookie somehow, and it all kind of clicks.
Yeah, and I would expect Lively to be imported to the starting lineup full-time next season. If not, maybe even in this series, he's just been the better of the two. But I think Waz hits on something that's interesting there. I think, you could talk about the staggering of the two of them and then playing them in short bursts. I think there is a fitness element to this, just running the bigger plotting centers in the league out there, like the Rudy Gobert types, into the ground. So it's just like a strategy when it comes to literal minutes. But I also think the types of guys that they've been using is pretty instructive here, in part because I think offensively, I wonder how much a lot of their success offensively is that they have been activated by two playmaker lob guys in the backcourt with Kyrie and Luka. And so is this as much as fitting guys around those two as it is these types, the vertical spacing rim protector types? So there's that element to it too, Rob.
Well, particularly when you think about what do you need to have on the floor around a pretty traditional center who can only kind of score around the basket for the most part, the easy answer is playmaking. And you can do that with having literally one of the best passers in the world like Luka Doncic. Or honestly, you can do it with a good passer who just attracts a lot of attention as a scorer, like Jalen Brunson, for example. Like the reason Isaiah Hartenstein and Mitchell Robinson worked to the extent that those guys were healthy enough to play together is because you have an offensive threat that's attracting so much attention that they can dump off. Where we've seen teams that rely on this sort of size have trouble is when the lead playmaker or the lead point guard doesn't quite have enough to find the bigs in those spots, and then things start getting clogged up. And so that is absolutely the single skill that unlocks this sort of possibility. If you have guards or wings who can draw attention, then you can leverage this in a way that gets you deep into the playoffs. If you don't, you end up kind of like the Orlando Magic, a team that has a similar sort of staggered big approach. Wendell Carter and Mo Wagner, I thought played really well in the first round for the most part. But that offense isn't quite unlocked in terms of its playmaking yet. And so you're almost there and you're on the cusp of something that could be really formidable, but not quite.
Yeah, I think another part of this too is it seemed like before this, there was a kind of a mini evolution of front courts where we saw a lot of two big lineups playing. And I think Al Horford and Robert Williams were at the forefront of this in part because, and there were a bunch of examples like Allen and Mobley for Cleveland, Adams and Jaren Jackson Jr. With the Grizzlies, there was more of a traditional big, but then you played a roving rim protector and you cleaned up on the glass because of that. And I think a lot of that was first and foremost because of the math skewing things on offense with three-pointers, where you really had to kind of pick and choose where you were going to put your emphasis. If you were going to sell out and stop the easy buckets at the rim, maybe you let the percentages dictate the shooting success to a certain extent, right? So we saw teams kind of try to make a calculated bet almost. And I almost feel like this is kind of a mini evolution of that, where it's like if we have two centers going at all time protecting the rim, then we can actually be pretty successful with that with one guy, and then we can maybe add more resources around there to also cover the perimeter. We can get into PJ Washington's effect as well, but I almost wonder if this is a more streamlined approach to what was an otherwise same issue that was kind of approached differently.
So to me, those bigs better be able to finish on the lob. Like, it can't be the kind of big where you dump it off and he gathers and no, that's not. Yeah, that's not going to help your offense. You gotta be
Derek Lively, like literally not missing a shot in a conference finals effectively. That's the level of finishing that you kind of need. Not, I mean, give or take a miss here or there, but you've got to be hyper efficient, really accessible.
Yeah, because that alley-oop dunk, right, you're going from you're sacrificing, quote-unquote, spacing for the ability to put yourself in a position to get a 90% shot, right? Now, if you're handing it off to, say, a Zach Randolph type or just somebody who's more ground-bound, that's like a 60-something% shot when he catches it in there, amongst the trees and with the little guys digging in. That's a wholly different proposition. It's like, should I be making a sacrifice at the three-point line for that percentage of shot? Like, your guy better be able to vertically space, better be able to suck in extra defenders who are worried about that lob threat, right? And so that's a very important component in my opinion as well.
And the trade-off on the other side, if you're someone who can take away even a few of those baskets on a consistent basis, playoff basketball is hard, man. And these teams have reinforced and these runs have reinforced it. When games are coming down to 2 and 4 points or going into overtime, the fact that Daniel Gafford was able to turn away 3 shots at the rim or alter a handful of shots at the rim, that's a game-changing difference.
Yeah. I was also kind of looking around too, and as much as we think that there are just a bunch of bouncy vertical spacing big men, like there aren't a lot that do it this well. Like the Clint Capella type, I remember seemed to be in vogue at a certain point where like, oh, everyone just needs a Clint Capella just to put around their ball handler who will just take too many possessions, if only to give them more spacing in a different way, right? But then it's just like, how many Clint Capella, bouncy, athletic, jump out the gym sort of guys do we actually have? Who can catch, which is huge.
Not the Clint Capella type, it turns out. But there was a reason why when we talk about those archetypes, it was, oh, the Tyson Chandler type, oh, the Clint Capella type. But if you really push the button on that and said, okay, who else beyond Tyson Chandler, beyond
Birdman,
Clint Capella?
Chris Anderson.
That's a great example of a low-cost, high-risk. But JaVale McGee was bad for a bunch of teams before he was in a very, very confined role, and he was good at that very, very confined thing.
Well, that was more of a JaVale McGee issue, I think. But like,
isn't it always?
Yeah, I know. How many contracts did that guy get? Just even after the Warriors, even after the Lakers, is he still getting paid by the Mavericks? I believe because of the mid-level they gave him. He was on an NBA years ago.
He was on an NBA roster this season, so that's crazy,
unbelievable. Yeah, everyone says that they need a JaVale McGee type, but it's actually harder to get a JaVale McGee type where you protect the rim, but also are able to be a lob threat on the other end there. So that's part of it. All right, why don't we move on to the second part of this? Because I do think it's kind of in conjunction with what we're talking about with the centers. Obviously, the other big trade that the Mavs made at the deadline was getting PJ Washington in there. And I do think what we saw with kind of the dual big lineups with the Horford and Robert Williams was as much about like taking advantage of the personnel that you have on staff and just finding the perfect complement there. A lot of this is just problem solving for your specific team. And then I think it trickles down to the rest of the league and becomes more of a trend here. But I do think, Rob, teams have taken note of Aaron Gordon and just how much he's been able to round out what they're doing with the Nuggets, but also specifically by pairing Nikola Jokic with the specific type of guy he needs around him to do a little bit of everything. Obviously, PJ in a different class than Gordon. Gordon's kind of fringe all-star the past 2 seasons in that role. But do you think like this PJ Washington type, for the sake of conversation, just kind of like a do everything big with like the size of a traditional power forward, but kind of some of the more modern flourishes, some spacing, can put it on the deck a little bit. Do you think that's like something people in the league are taking note of?
I think you have to. And with PJ, that conversation was always so interesting because he was playing on primarily bad or underwhelming Charlotte teams, where it was hard to get a great read on who he was going to be in high leverage series, in big moments against really top class competition. Hard to know. Like, is he going to be able to be like a versatile wing? Is he going to be primarily a 4? Is he going to really be a factor protecting the rim at all? In which I would say to the Mavs some extent, but that's not really what he's asked to do. He is more of a space defender. He's more of an on-ball key perimeter defender for them, even guarding opposing point guards and shooting guards. That versatility has always mattered, and that's where I do see the Aaron Gordon comp for him is, okay, we have the flexibility on defense to move Luka and Kyrie wherever they need to go that makes the most sense for them. And Derrick Jones Jr. and PJ Washington can be assigned to the key threats, basically wherever they are on the floor. But walk me through the Aaron Gordon comp, because when I think about Aaron Gordon, I think about him almost in the Andrew Wiggins kind of mold of this is a guy who's in a finite role, but when it comes time in a conference finals or a championship series, he can pop off and have a huge scoring impact or have a big all-around impact in a particular game. PJ is definitely more of a stand in the corner kind of guy, and that's incredibly valuable, but it is a little bit more rigid at times.
Yeah, I think about it more from the size and probably the defensive aspect of it. If you're looking at like the evolution of since pretty much the Warriors era, you're looking probably at that 4 spot is the one that's undergone most of the change, where it's like you size down to get more shooting on the floor. And you saw teams go to more extreme extents to even Harrison Barnes, for instance, who at this point is like more of a 4 than anything at this point. That's kind of the more typical type that you're seeing was. But then you saw teams size up almost to counter that, where it's like, we get the dual big situation. Not only is that going to help us defensively on the glass, but maybe we could pound some teams, right? With just the size. And obviously the Nuggets have been at the forefront of that. But then like Gordon and Washington seem to be right in the middle, right in that sweet spot where it's like, you're not sizing down, but you're not necessarily sizing up. So we're actually getting back to a more traditional sense of a power forward just from a build type, but he has some of the more modern aspects to his games, like we were saying. Like, so you're kind of getting that sweet spot in the middle. Does that seem like a difference for you, Oz, as we're kind of like charting and mixing and matching some of these guys?
I think of those guys in tandem too, but for different reasons, right? With Gordon, it's like this guy has size, has athleticism, and has skill. He's not perfect, right? He can't shoot it in a way that you would ultimately want, but this guy handles it. He passes it, knows how to cut. Like, this guy's a really smart player while also bringing this size and athleticism. If you could bring him to a context where his shooting doesn't completely tank your operation, now you've got a superstar role player, right? But he can't be a superstar role player in a context where his shooting and spacing is actually needed. And so that's what I think where I think teams have sort of figured out that you need to emphasize the size and skill. Like, figure out the size and skill, and then it's like, okay, let's make sure he's in a context where we're not emphasizing those things that he's not so good at. I honestly think of the Miami Heat sort of process. Like, whenever you hear ex-Heat players talk about their role on the Heat, is like, Spo said you need to do this and this. That's it, right? And like as long as
and those two things are listen to what I say and pass your conditioning test. Those are the two things you have to do.
Right. And then with PJ, it's the same thing. This guy has size, he has athleticism, and he has skill. Like nobody's saying he's like Kyrie with the ball handling, but he can put it on the floor. He can make an open shot. Like this guy has skill, but guess what? At his opening press conference, Nico Harrison dissed him, was like, yo, he didn't show defense in Charlotte. I have the confidence that he'll show it here. And that's another thing that I will say specifically about defense. I think if you have a quality program and you bring a guy with athleticism and some skill and size, you should have the confidence that you could get him there on defense. And one of my core memories to this fact is the 2008 NBA Finals, where I watched Paul George, who people don't remember this. I'm older than a lot of people listen to this. But like before the KG and the Ubuntu era of the Celtics, Paul George had a horrible reputation, particularly on defense. Like it was getting to the point where people was like,
Paul Pierce you're talking about.
Paul Pierce. Sorry, did I say Paul George?
Yeah.
Sorry. Paul Pierce
when did Paul George have a terrible defensive reputation?
Sorry, Paul Pierce had a horrible defensive reputation. KG gets in there. They get a winning program in there. Not only does he turn around his defense and his rep, and honestly, it was to the point where people were like, yo, maybe this dude is kind of a loser kind of guy who only cares about his numbers and getting buckets and isn't a winning team kind of oriented guy. Not only did he change that around, I watched this dude strap Kobe up in the finals. That's a thing that happened from a guy who had the worst reputation on defense to like, no, he's one of the best defenders at his position in the league. And I think that's a lesson to take away, where it's like, if a guy has the fundamentals and you have a program that you believe people will give you buy-in on your culture and your approach, I think if people show bad defense in the past, have some faith that they can do better in the future.
Yeah, you have to trust who they are as competitors in the way that the Mavs will sometimes trust Luka to do exactly that. He's not going to be a great defender. He's certainly not on the level of Paul Pierce guarding Kobe in the finals.
No, he ain't.
But
that.
you'll see individual matchups that he starts to take a little more seriously. You'll see the effort in games that matter. You can see enough to get the Mavs to the NBA Finals. And that's what you need from a star of that caliber. And so, yes, part of it is knowing the guys who are on our team who are not good defenders, what are the conditions and situations where that can level up and they can step up and be competent defensively. And then there's the other part you're talking about, Woz, which is how do you identify players on other teams, the PJ Washington types, who are not guarding well for those teams on a consistent basis? How can you reconceptualize what they do to make sense for your team? And I think the Mavs have done that both with Washington and Derrick Jones, who, look, Derrick Jones was guarding a lot of bigs in Miami and in Chicago before he came to the Mavs. They brought him in to be a perimeter go-to stopper. And you can argue the efficacy of that. And like, you know, is he an all defensive level player? Like maybe not. Maybe he's not quite on that caliber, but he absorbs a ton of minutes in high value assignments. He's tough on those guys. He chases around screens. And it's a similar thing with PJ where, yeah, he's not the best rim protecting four, like a small ball five. They basically never play him at small ball five, although that could change in this series. They rely on him to be a perimeter defender and a stopper with that size and that Aaron Gordon type strength on the perimeter that you're talking about, Justin, where that's the flexibility that matters, I think, in when you're thinking about modern NBA team building. And a lot of it is coming from the athleticism.
Sorry, Rob, just to put a finer point on it, PJ Washington is not playing this way if he's traded to the Wizards or if he's traded to the Hawks. It's not happening. It's not going to happen. This context, this coach, this star player, this opportunity to win big matters in that equation.
Yeah. The feedback loop of competitive basketball is so strong. Like if you're a team that's fighting for something, guys will fight for that.
Totally. I think the one thing he's always had in his bag is that he is skilled for his size. And if you look at kind of the evolution of modern basketball, you could call the Steph Curry Warriors kind of the major inflection point. But even before that, it's bringing skill to the masses, right? It's not just specific positions. We're getting skill everywhere. And we size down specifically because the guys with skill with shooting were smaller. And so that's why teams size down, right? But now we're seing it come pretty naturally to guys of PJ Washington's size, who is a typical power forward size, as we mentioned. Also, some of the bigger men, like even look at Derek Lively, the fact that he can pass and do a little bit of everything. And I think he'll do more as he's longer in that Dallas Mavericks system. Maybe we'll see him step outside and hit a corner three eventually. I think that is kind of what we're starting to see across the board here. And so if anything, it's kind of a leveling out of where we were. It's just guys are just more skilled and talented than they were in the past. So it's like, it's the old meat and the new, pretty much.
Yeah. I just got a little sad, y'all, thinking about what could have happened if Anthony Randolph found the right team, y'all.
Oh my God.
Just imagine what could have been if the right situation, the right fit, the right chemistry, the right coach, the right teammates would have happened. Maybe he could have flourished in that kind of way.
I would argue he did. It was just in the EuroLeague.
In the
and it was with the
ACB?
Slovenian national team. You know, he's found the right spot for him ultimately.
He was Luka's teammate before Luka's teammates. Yeah.
Can I introduce a kind of a wild card element to this conversation as we're talking about the do everything fours, the guys who have all this skill, who are versatile? I would like to present to you Karl Anthony Towns, who I found to be both essential in a lot of these ways for the Wolves and also limiting for them. It kind of puts a different lens on this conversation where he plays like one of these skeleton key power forwards in a lot of ways, and yet when he came up against that high-level Mavericks defense and his shot stopped falling, he became a really limited player really, really quickly. And I think that it's so interesting with these guys who have somewhat versatile games. What is the thing that you fall back on the most? And for Towns, that is his shot. And for Gordon, it's probably more his defense and his playmaking. For PJ Washington, it probably is similar to Towns, where it's like more about the corner three and whether he's hitting on that and how he's doing at the point of attack. But the fact that Towns is in a conversation like this, and I think he deserves to be, it puts an interesting lens on him as a star. Like, he's a different kind of star for the Wolves.
See, for me, the Towns thing is that he's overqualified to be a PJ or an Aaron Gordon, obviously.
Absolutely.
But he doesn't have the bandwidth, basketball IQ-wise, to be an actual bona fide star. He doesn't have the decision-making. He can't consistently win on the decisions that he's forced to make as, one of the pillars forced with carrying the offensive load. And then on defense, I mean, come on, man. Some of the boneheaded, ridiculous, the stop foul and shit became a meme.
That's the thing. He's not really a power forward. He's more of a skilled center who got shoved into that role because the Wolves built their team about being very big, right? Look who he guarded against the Nuggets. He was primarily guarding Nikola Jokic, and he did a pretty good job at the very least matching that heft. But when we go to the team like the Mavs, who's built a little bit more traditional, kind of like, I mean, the Celtics are in this same general vein where it's like bigger wing types. Like, that seems to be what is having success, whereas like the Wolves approach is almost too specific. It's like they went super big so they can counter super big, but they're more susceptible when we're going in a team kind of in the middle zone.
Maybe so. And this is kind of how these two conversations tie together, because Towns is in that range of centers where if he is your star standalone five, you have limitations on defense. You have the limitations on playmaking that we're talking about if he's like a big post-up threat. He's in that space where you kind of have to find and make room for a player like that. And I think what's good about the PJ Washington, Aaron Gordon types, you don't have to make so much room for them. They understand who they are. They understand how to wait for their moments and like rise to those occasions. And Towns is in a slightly more awkward space in that he's too talented to do just that. He is a more particular kind of piece for the puzzle.
You're not a conference finals team with Karl Towns as your center, period. That's just not going to happen. Unless you have a LeBron in his prime, like some insane level star next to him that is playing at Hall of Fame star level next to him to basically paper over his deficiencies. I don't see how this guy at center, like even his successes against Jokic, Rudy was roaming behind the play. That could make him if let's just say you're a prototypical NBA power forward. Let's say it's like Julius Randle roaming off of Jokic post-ups on Karl Towns. Like, nah, son. Nah, son.
I do think Towns is more on the star end of things, both in terms of just like how he plays, but also like the fact that he's a little bit more manicured. You need to fit things around him as opposed to the guys we're talking about, Gordon and Washington, are the guys you fit around the stars because they're more stars in their role, right? They're the guys that you add to a system with Luka and Kyrie already in place to do a little bit of everything. And honestly, that's the value of having someone like Gordon when you need him to step up. I bring up the game I saw in Portland where he just like flashed as a small ball five, completely took Scoot Henderson out of the game. And it's just like he could have that level to him and like do more, but you don't want him to do more because actually this is the nice spot for him where he's like the fourth option. Right. Yeah. And I do think that's kind of the next part of this whole conversation we're having, which is number 3 on the list here, is just going all in for some of these teams, but doing so more with depth. We had the Celtics who went out and got Kristaps and Drew Holiday, kind of more on the star end of things. Obviously, both of those guys have been all-stars in the past, but have kind of diminished in recent years to the point where they're more in that kind of Aaron Gordon fringe all-star level. I do think that the Mavs, once again, probably the shining example of this, where they went out and got guys who are just like solid as hell rotation guys who play specific roles to complement what you do. And I wonder, Rob, if that's kind of another sneaky trend that we're talking about here, where it's like, one, you want to go all in and take advantage of the moment when you have someone like Luka, but it actually isn't about getting another star, getting a big 3 like the Heatles era. It's actually about rounding out what we do.
Yeah. I'm really curious to see how, to flash forward, this could change the way teams operate at the deadline next season, right? The teams that are kind of on the cusp, that are really close, that are feeling really competitive. I just think that the West in particular is so balanced right now, where if you even think that you're kind of in that mix, as the Mavericks prove themselves to be, you should trade for Daniel Gafford or PJ Washington. Like you should invest some draft capital to make that work. If you're a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder next time around, I think it probably is time to push some of those chips in and see what you can get, even if they're going to be short-term chips. There never is going to be an absolute perfect time to go all in, but as you're saying, we're seeing teams do it in a more balanced and, I would say, like, secure way. You're not pushing in so much to get a star. You're pushing in moderate assets to get good NBA players who can help you right now. And that might be enough to get you through the Western Conference. It may not be enough to take a decent Eastern Conference team and make them competitive with the Celtics. That margin seems a little bit bigger. But out West, I think there's lots of room for teams to do basically what Dallas did.
Yeah, if you're trying to win a championship, though, like I'm pretty much convinced now that there was a time maybe like 4 or 5 years ago where the emphasis on skill, meaning guys that can pass and shoot and move and were cerebral, like that was the sort of advantage. I think everybody's caught up in that regard. And now you need size and athleticism. Like this postseason has convinced me that you got to be big, you got to be strong, you got to be fast, you got to be physical, because everybody's at the point where they're taking enough threes, where they're generating enough quality looks from there, where, you know, the offenses are sophisticated. Even the Wolves, who like have had one of the most, you know, basic sort of offenses, like Naz Reid and Karl Towns was firing that thing up. Ant is firing that thing up. You know, Conley I would have liked to see fired up a little bit more, but like they as traditional as their size was, like they had guys that were willing to like, all right, I see daylight. This 3 is going up. To me, man, if you're trying to win a championship, you better be going in the direction of like becoming bigger and stronger and faster. Like obviously skill still matters. I'm not an idiot, but I think the physicality part, man, like watching Dallas, watching the Wolves, even out East, you know, watching the Knicks get as far as they did. It damn sure wasn't on beautiful, skillful basketball. Yeah. I think it was on physicality and brute force, a lot of it, honestly.
Physicality, yes, but size, no. Right? Like they were undersized, even relative to the Pacers. It was, you know, it's a lot of Josh Hart as an ostensible power forward, like making it work in some of those lineups.
But OG is big as hell for his size.
Yes.
And when Mitch and Hartenstein were playing, like they were playing bigger than Philadelphia was. They was beating up on Joel Embiid. That's what I mean. Like, obviously, like, yeah,
Totally.
on the fringes, like, that's where they got cooked. But, like, I think if they were still able to have their size advantages, you know what I mean? Like, still be physical with OG, still have Mitch while having Hartenstein, like, they would have beat the Pacers, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
And so, to me, that's what I think they need to be doing. Teams need to be doing.
I wonder if the answer is you just need to have a little bit of everything. I think you need to be more matchup proof than you have in the past, particularly in the West. Like, look at the playoffs we just witnessed, where it felt like there was a little bit more teams beating other teams based on who they were facing, rather than the inevitable champion getting to that point. Right? Yeah. There's a certain level of inevitability with the NBA that the best teams typically make it to the end point. Whereas now, especially in the Western Conference, but I wonder in the East as well, as those teams kind of get a little bit more healthier and as they load up this offseason, Philly in particular, like I do wonder if it's going to be a little bit more rock, paper, shoot than it has been in the past, where it's like, I wonder if the Mavs had just enough versatility, enough depth to go at a variety of teams. But I also wonder if they got the Nuggets. Maybe the Nuggets are in the finals, but the Nuggets happened to encounter the Wolves before they got to that point.
I want to talk about that, but can we revisit rock, paper, shoot real quick?
Yeah.
What's going on? What's going on with that?
Scissors say
rock,
shoot.
What's going on?
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure it wasn't
I
just
thought they was doing
regionalism.
something different in Connecticut than
This
they
is
was
what I
in
was
Queens.
wondering.
I was
Okay,
like, okay, they got their own
I'm really
thing
glad
up
we
there.
cleared that up.
We're
But yeah,
traditionalists out there.
Dallas is a fun team to talk about in this regard because going through the Thunder and the Wolves back to back, that's about as different as high-level playoff opponents will get in terms of their personnel and style of play. And the fact that Dallas was able to kind of maneuver to get through both of them, I would say to varying degrees. Honestly, in some ways, Dallas had a harder time with OKC than it did with Minnesota. And you can forecast that into these finals in the sense that the Thunder and the Celtics have a lot more in common than the Celtics and the Wolves do, and what that could mean for Dallas in this matchup. But I think that's been true, generally speaking, for a long time, right? Your ability to be matchup proof, your ability to be adaptable, it kind of ties all these conversations together. Like, yeah, you want to have 48 minutes of good big man play, but maybe you also need these do-it-all four types who can be flexible and versatile and give you lots of strategic options. Maybe you also do need some small ball flexibility here and there for the teams that really demand it of you. You do have to be able to do everything and play every way. And most importantly, you have to be able to push the buttons that stress other teams out in that way and test the limits of their team building. That's maybe the most important part of this.
Yeah, I would say two recent things that might have kind of messed with the sample that we have here is one, I think it's tougher to get through the regular season than ever before. On the one hand, you have more opportunities to make it into the postseason with the play-in tournament. Yeah. But I do think like regular season has become tough where you can't just coast through. You can't just load up on superstars and then wait until you get to the finals and then your rotation slims down and all of a sudden you're playing like 7 rock solid guys when you had to wade through the Norris Cole minutes and whatnot earlier in the season. I also wonder if like this trade deadline in the offseason before, we saw a lot of teams getting in while the getting was good before the door closed with the second apron and the new CBA, where it's like you saw a lot of activity. I mean, we didn't get a lot of deadline activity. It was actually one of the worst deadlines in recent history, at the point where Alex Burke occupied our thinking for at least like 20 or 30 minutes on a podcast, probably.
That dude was popping off for 20 plus in the NBA, like in the playoffs. Like Alec Burks became one of the most important Knicks on the floor.
They had to wait until they only had like 7 guys to play him.
Look, take that up with Tom Thibodeau, all right?
But like we saw a lot of action. Siakam got done. OG got done. We saw a lot of trades leading up to the deadline. I do wonder if a lot of teams loaded up as much as possible because they knew it was going to become really damn difficult later on.
Yeah, and what does that mean for the sort of super team model that is kind of passing out of fashion right now? I would say Phoenix is probably the closest thing.
A dub. Yeah, they're done. You're done.
But, I mean, we'll see what happens with Philly this summer. There's some teams that are in a position to make a run at a third star with the kind of resources that they have going into the offseason. Phoenix, though, like did not have the bodies to be competitive. And I think we're seeing, again, a lot of these conversations coalesce where they didn't have the size, they didn't have the depth. They got swept off the floor against a bigger, deeper team in the Wolves. The Clippers, are a kind of a more nuanced conversation. I don't like if Kawhi Leonard gets hurt. I don't think it matters if you have 2 or 3 stars. You're kind of cooked.
Clippers.
So I don't know if that's exactly their
they don't
problem.
Have a super team. There's nothing super about that team.
I mean, they certainly look like it in January.
Let's say that they got super contracts.
Yeah. If that's not a super contract, I would love a super contract. Let's see if we can shoot over the line on that one.
Yeah. So we saw a lot. I mean, the Mavs are kind of an outlier in this regard. A lot of teams also aren't doing things with free agents anymore. And so I think Philly is kind of like the team I'm watching going into this offseason, whether or not they will zag back the other way. Kevin Pelton had a really interesting piece on ESPN going into the conference finals where he looked at kind of how each team was built, and only 6 rotation players in the conference finals came via free agent signings. 2 of them were undrafted free agents, Naz Reid, Sam Hauser. And so like clearly these are teams built a different way than we had seen previous, when like even Brooklyn and the Clippers, as Waz is alluding to, a lot of teams are just getting the guy via the draft or via trades, as we've seen, and doing it differently. But the CBA is going to come for all of them. Like we're talking about the Thunder as kind of like a model for success.
I can't
when
wait
they have to pay
for the
those
CBA to come for them.
But they have to already be careful about who they add as that 5th starter, because they're going to have to pay Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren in like 2 years, and those maxes come earlier than you think. So like in a way, I think like everyone's going to have to worry about this if they have enough great players to pay what they deserve.
Sure, but to me, that gives them 2 years to pay people that are high quality role players. And then when those contracts kick in, all right, we're getting rid of those. We're now developing guys next to our grizzled second contract stars, which I think is a beautiful place to be in, honestly. But it is good. They will have to eventually pivot to filling out their role in the way that the Nuggets tried to do this year, where it's like, yo, we're not going to be extra extravagant with our complimentary players, say our bench guys. We're going to try to develop guys. And, you know, one day the OKC Thunder will be there too.
Yeah. Teams are shook about the second apron, though. I got to tell you, like I think it probably is, but either way, it is having the intended effect, right? Even if it's teams operating out of fear, like they are being more conservative with some of that decision making in a way that makes me look at these NBA finals in which Derek Lively could be one of the most important players on the floor for the Mavs. I don't know whether to think of Lively as the star, part of any kind of trend, any kind of data, as far as like maybe you can draft the right rookie and they can be a part of a winning team right away. They can be a meaningful contributor to a finals team. I tend that he's probably more the like exception that proves the rule in this way. Bruh. But if we're talking about going all in,
Luka Doncic, dog.
Yes, but here's my thought, Waz, is like if we're talking about teams that they should go all in, there was a lot of pressure on the Mavs to trade that 10th pick for a veteran who would help them now to make an all-in type move.
Oh, and it turned out that Derek Lively, Ayton, perhaps.
for whoever you may want to propose.
He was tied to the Mavs. I'm not just saying that because I like talking crap. Like, he was actually a guy that people were saying the Mavs might go after. That's why I made that joke.
Totally.
That was a real rumor and a real target, but it turned out that Derek Lively was the better win-now move than probably whatever veteran they would have gotten for that pick.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, I tend to think young people just aren't able to contribute much, if anything, but specifically in the NBA. Yeah, to
society
sure.
as well.
But specifically in the NBA, I mean, we see this every year. There aren't a lot of plus rookies. When you look at the ledger, it's like 1 or 2. I think it helps to lean into more of a role-playing type like Lively, where he had a very defined role, and maybe he could expand it over time, where it's like if you needed like a 3-and-D sort of guy, maybe, but if you get into like more of the ball handling range, guys who are actually like managing certain possessions, then it gets a little trickier. But I like that idea in general. Like, do teams, especially in this draft where it's allegedly light on top end talent, do you lean older because you want to get that guy a little farther along? It's an interesting idea.
I don't think teams should do it for the record, but I think some teams will talk themselves into the idea that those rookies will help them right now.
5th year red shirt senior just because you think he's going to contribute to your playoff run. Here's what I'll say about these apron pussies, right?
Yeah. Okay.
First of all,
I yabbed that too soon.
build up a team that's actually a contender. Then worry about, oh man, we can't keep this contender together but for the apron. Build up an actual contender first before you start being scared about an apron, fam. How about that?
Should we get that on a t-shirt? Apron pussies? Throw that out at the live show?
We'll get it to match the hats from the women's marches of 2016, y'all. How was that those
Jesus
marches,
Christ.
by the way? It was nuts. It was gnarly, dude. I was like, whoa, holy moly. I don't think I'm happy about 45, but my Lord.
Well, speaking of apron pussies, no, I do think if I'm going to try to salvage this, I do think Karl Towns and the Wolves are kind of the inflection point, I guess, for how much this matters. Tim Connolly reportedly came back for another year at the very least, as they figure out that ownership situation, getting paid a hearty amount of money. So shouts to him for cashing in on whatever discord is going on between A-Rod and Glenn Taylor. But whether or not they abort on Towns just for the sake of saving money, I think is going to be a real test case for that. There's no reason that they should just completely scrap this team. Like maybe get a different type of player at that salary in order to get like more playmaking, for instance. I could see that. But if it's for anything other than that, it's specifically because of the CBA, because of the tax penalties. We'll see about that. Last one, though, we're kind of talking around this. We already kind of tapped into it, but lower seeds making the finals and just general parity overall. I mean, we already talked about like 15 different teams who are kind of in the mix here, so you can kind of tell that we're in a different era. But I think lower seeds making the finals, we're kind of in like just a halcyon days here, where last 5 years we had the Heat twice at the number 5 seed in the bubble and the number 8 last year, which I can't believe that fucking happened even a year out from now.
I can't. They played the Boston Celtics in the conference finals.
All right.
Perhaps the soon-to-be NBA champion Boston Celtics.
Right. And then you have the Mavs this year, which I think Dan Feldman had this stat in one of his newsletters. That's in the past 5 years, we had 3 such teams, I think 5 and below in the finals. In the first 73 years of NBA basketball, we also had 3, the Rockets twice, and then the Knicks. And then even the Knicks were an 8 seed who made it in large part because of the strike and just that jumbling up the amount of games that they were playing that year. So I do wonder if like this is as clear an evidence of parity as anything.
Well, here's the thing. Like if you want to zoom all the way out, I think about 2/3 of the champions in NBA history have been number 1 seeded teams. The fact that we're getting this
crazy.
kind of variability over the last 5 years, not in terms of who's winning necessarily, because look, Denver was a number 1 seed last year. Boston is a number 1 seed and could easily win these NBA finals. Maybe it's just a continuation of that general theme. But the fact that the teams that they're beating are 5th and 8th seeds feels like a dramatic shift. Usually this is the turf for at least a 2 or 3 seed. I think only 2 teams ever have won the title as a 4th seed or lower. We have staring in front of us now for the 2nd year in a row, a realistic chance for a team to be the 3rd on that list. That is notable. That is different. Like there is a sea change happening in terms of the way teams are making their way through the bracket, or perhaps regarding the strength of the teams at the top of these conference and the general parity that is putting them there.
By the way, this isn't accidental. This is by design. This is what Adam Silver wanted. All of these cap rules and cap restrictions, like it's all in service of having a harder cap so that the teams at the top can no longer hoard the talent and therefore remain at the tippy top by spending. Adam wanted this to be closer to the NFL playoffs where it feels more unpredictable. Obviously, we know that the Indiana Pacers under no circumstances could win the championship this postseason. We knew that going in, but we thought the Bucks had a chance if healthy. we thought we knew the Celtics had a chance, the champs, the defending champs, obviously the top 3 seeds in the West, like all of those teams, Luka being who he is, like this was all part of the plan. And then, like a lot of owners was just like, yo, man, I like the idea that I got this built-in excuse to not spend as much as humanly possible when my team is good.
Do you like how the playoffs went though? Like, do you, as a viewer, do you think it's successful to have more teams in the mix?
I think me personally, as an NBA fan, psychopath, like going into the Wolves and Mavs series where I just had no idea what was going to happen. Same with OKC and Mavs, no idea what was going to happen. I thought that was exhilarating. I have no idea what's going to happen in the finals. Like, I love that. Now, do I think casual people would rather like have a Patriots or a Lakers or Miami Heatles to root against and know, and know who needs to be taken down? I think the casual fans might lean in that direction. But me personally, going into the playoffs and every series, I'm just like constantly being surprised and constantly discovering new things about these teams and players. I personally enjoy it.
Yeah, I think the way to bridge that in an ideal world is you have this sort of parity, but you have a healthier Eastern Conference side of the bracket, right? You can alleviate some of those concerns for casual fans if Giannis is on the floor, if Jimmy Butler is on the floor, if all of the healthy complement of stars are actually out there. And it's like, oh, I may not be super familiar with the Heat season, but like I know this guy, I know these competitors, I know these stars, and those can be kind of your anchor points for the audience you're trying to bring in.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because I do think the East bounces back next year and maybe we will get that. But then it gets into the whole kind of broader conversation about what the NBA actually wants, because as we've seen, the ratings pop when it's Warriors Cavs, but like for the hardcore fans like us, like seeing the matchups kind of play out in this way is kind of fascinating. I love not knowing what was going to happen in a way that we hadn't seen before. Unfortunately, the playoffs as a whole, I would say most of the series were more duds and unbalanced in ways that we weren't expecting, but like that just might be roll of the dice and probably gets us into the inevitable conversation of how many regular season games these teams are playing. I ultimately default to that being the major sticking point. Like if you want to see your superstars healthy and ready to go at the end of the season in the highest level spotlight situations, like play fewer games, but we're never going to get to that point.
It's never happening.
And so this might be a nice little middle ground.
I do think where we got this year was we ended up with a lot of series where there were 2 and 3 awesome games. And then the rest of the series was not very good. Like, and there's all, even in very competitive matchups, there's typically 1 or 2 blowouts that we forget about in the midst of it. But there just wasn't a lot like that was top to bottom awesome for an entire series. We just didn't really get that.
I mean, look, yes, I don't think we got like games 1 through 7 nail biters or whatever, but the drama of Knicks and Sixers was insane.
Yeah,
right?
And Knicks Pacers for that matter was also awesome.
Delivered like an insane amount of drama. And what I would ask you guys, to me, and this is ultimately what I wonder the most about the league, is because it's my belief that we're still chasing the high of 2016. And like, I don't know what is the scenario under which we get that much juice in an NBA playoffs matchup? Like the insane amount of drama associated. But maybe it's just we got lightning in a bottle and we can't achieve it. And like Steph Curry, and LeBron being 2 of the most famous athletes on the planet at the damn time that this is happening. But I'm like, could we ever get to a point where, Ant Edwards or a Luka West representative is playing against somebody in the East where the story is this like, and the matchup is this incredible? I don't know.
I think it takes superstars first and foremost, which they don't make them like Steph and LeBron anymore. So we have to be conscious of that. So we're dealing with a different level of celebrity even, but I also think it's repetition and familiarity, right? Like that built over time to where the point where we're at number 2 and number 3. It's like a Rocky movie at that point. You know the characters and you know the stakes and you know the drama. and it's colliding in a way that's just thrilling. And honestly, if like we get more Dallas Celtics, I think this finals could be potentially incredible. If this lives up to the mark and we get another one of those.
Let's go.
Let's go. They have like the Kyrie back in Boston. You have KP back in Dallas. It kind of has all of the benchmarks that we're looking for in that sort of thing.
That's why I don't really, I'm not in the business of forecasting the ratings of these things, but I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of intrigue in these finals. I think one, the matchup deserves it, and the basketball will be very good and very interesting, but it has those stars. It has some of the most famous active NBA players in the world. And players who attract such like fervent fan bases, I would say, particularly on the Dallas side with Luka and Kyrie, and then one of the most engaged team fan bases in the world in the Celtics, and an incredible team.
Is the Kyrie fan base fervent? That's the descriptor we're going with there. I like that.
It is that. It is, yeah.
Okay.
They're active. Look, as a human being who has written a Kyrie Irving based story on the ringer.com this week, I'm very aware of the Kyrie Irving
Branch Davidians fervent. What about the Jamestown folks? Were they fervent?
Okay.
That's all at Big Waz on Twitter if you just want to let Waz know what you think about that.
Yeah, listen, Abram pussies out there, we want superstars. All right?
Let's go,
Stop
baby.
depriving us of the superstars.
That's
That's the takeaway from this hour-long big picture discussion. But this was fun. We'll do it again another time, probably next postseason, or maybe even before that. But we'll talk to you as usual this weekend. I think Saturday. No, we're going to record on Sunday. Is that what we decided?
Yeah, after the game.
The game is Sunday.
Yeah. We're doing it after the game.
Okay.
Yep.
Sweet.
So this weekend we're actually going to be recording after game 2 on Sunday. So look out for our pod then. We have been recording on Saturday, so it'll be more Sunday night into Monday morning. Thank you to Isaiah Blakely. Thank you to Eddie Ocampo for making one of the best Instagram videos of all time that even Rob had to appreciate. Thank you to Ben Cruz. We'll be back this weekend for game 2. Enjoy game 1. We'll talk to you later.